On Friday, the Mets pitching prospects shined in the spring breakout game. JD Davis signed with the Oakland Athletics, and the Mets made some more roster cuts. I'll break it all down on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, Friday was the spring breakout game. For those of you who aren't aware, this is a new tradition, at least I hope it's a tradition, that Major League Baseball started this offseason or this spring training, where they're showcasing the top prospects around baseball with an exhibition game. So two teams square up for the Mets this year as Mets versus Nationals. And their top prospects take the field in a 7-inning game. And I thought it was a ton of fun to just learn more about this system, to see all these guys get on the field together and play a ball game. And I think a lot of people, or a lot of Mets fans, I should say, probably showed up or tuned in on TV to watch Luis Angel Acuna, Drew Gilbert, Jet Williams, and even Colin Houck, right? First chance to see the Mets first round pick from last year get in the box and take some hacks. And all that was cool, but really I think the lasting impression that you come away with from watching that game is the Mets have some arms that are up and coming, and this system is getting a lot better when it comes to developing pitching talent. Dom Hamill took the ball first. I thought that was an interesting choice by the Mets. They could have put Mike Vasil out there. They could have put Christian Scott. And this is just my opinion, but I wonder if they put Hamill out there because he doesn't get that same recognition to be, up there with those two guys. I think Vasil and Scott are sort of widely regarded as top 10 prospects in the system. Hamill is maybe just outside the top 10, but maybe he shouldn't be. I mean, honestly, if I was to go back in time and rank my top 10 again, the top 10 I made, 2 weeks ago, maybe I would have put Dom Hamill 10 over Kevin Parada. I don't know. He looked great in this outing. He was living 95. He touched 97 to get a pair of strikeouts. He struck out James Wood and Brady House, two really good prospects in the national system. He did give up a hit to Dylan Cruz to lead off the game, but there's no shame in that. Just a really good outing by Hamill. He did give up a run in the second, but I thought he looked comfortable on the mound. I thought his stuff looked really good, and I'm excited to see what he does this year in Syracuse. I mean, there is every chance that he could make it up to the big leagues this year and make some spot starts. I think he's very close. So good to see him get that nod, and he, fared very well with it. When it comes to the hitting in the first inning, Drew Gilbert reached on an error by James Wood, who just lost a fly ball in right field, which is kind of interesting because in the top half of the inning, Drew Gilbert lost one as well in right field. He eventually was able to track it down and make the catch. Wood did not make the catch. That allowed Gilbert to get to second base, and he came around to score on a double by Ryan Clifford. And that was an opposite field double that was just shot down the line. Clifford had two really good at-bats. He had that double. He later drew a walk. So he was maybe the MVP of the game when it comes to the offensive side of things. And really does look like just a hitter that pitchers will fear when he stands in that box. So that was fun to see. After Hamill exited in the third inning, Tyler Stewart took over. 1-2-3 inning, got 3 ground outs. He looked good, was throwing the ball hard. Blade Tidwell pitched in the fourth inning, and he looked rocky. Okay, he gave up a couple of hits. He did get a double play ball, which was turned by Luis Angel Acuna and Marco Vargas, who looked exceptional up the middle, particularly Vargas. For those of you who aren't aware, Vargas, again, was one of the prospects the Mets got in the David Robertson trade with the Marlins last year, and everyone raved about his defense and also his awareness at the plate. He went, I think it was 0 for 1 with 2 walks, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 0 for 1 with 2 walks. So he did showcase that plate discipline, but he looks like a guy that's going to probably be a second baseman long-term. He was a shortstop, is a shortstop, but this year in Port St. Lucie, Colin Houck is probably going to get the seniority just by being the first-round pick from this last draft. Hal could eventually move to third. He's a big kid. But Vargas looks like he's going to be an exceptional defensive second baseman if that ends up being his long-term home. So that was fun to watch. You go back and you look at Blade Tidwell, who I was talking about before I got sidetracked on Vargas. Like I said, he gave up a couple of hits, gets a double play ball, almost got out of the inning, but then he walked a guy on 5 pitches, gave up an RBI single, and then he got out of the inning. The funny thing is Blade Tidwell is maybe upside-wise the best prospect in the Mets system as far as a guy that could profile as a frontline starting pitcher. And yet I think he looked the worst of the Mets 6 pitchers in this game. He just did not have quite the command of the strike zone that we saw for some of the other guys. Could have just been a bad day. I wouldn't read too much into it, but just an interesting thing to note. Now, the Mets did score a couple of runs, or they scored 1 run in the 4th. Ryan Clifford drew that walk I mentioned, advanced to second on a wild pitch, and Kevin Parada, they were sort of playing a shift on him, and he shot a ground ball through a vacant hole, past second base and drove in Clifford. And then they scored a couple more runs in the 5th inning. Marco Vargas drawing a leadoff walk, Ryland Thomas getting a hit, Jeremy Rodriguez, the prospect the Mets got back in the Tommy Pham trade, he shot one into the outfield to drive in one, and then Vincent Perozzo drove in another with a base hit. Now, the 2 biggest stars of the game for me, outside of Clifford, who we mentioned, or Dom Hamill, the guys that just really popped when you saw him on the mound, Nolan McLean and Brandon Sproat. These guys looked absolutely disgusting, particularly Nolan McLean in the 5th inning. He struck out the leadoff man, a lefty, with this nasty back foot slider that had an RPM over 3,200, which is the spin rate. That is an elite spin rate on a slider. This guy is a two-way player. The Mets are going to let him try to hit this year. It'll be interesting to see how he fares in the box. But when you watch him on the mound, it is clear why that is what they showcased in this game. Now, they could have got him in at bat if they wanted to. They didn't. They put him on the mound. They put him on the mound for a reason. He's clearly an athlete. Of course, he's a two-way player. And you can see that athleticism play on the mound. He was more of a relief pitcher in college, so now they're going to try to stretch him out and make him a starter, try to add to his arsenal so he can have, a 4-pitch mix and actually, maintain his stuff throughout a whole game. And if that all comes together, this guy, from what I saw, I know that scouts aren't going to say right now a converted reliever from college is a frontline starting pitcher when he gets to the big leagues, but you could see it. And really, even if he doesn't, get to that apex of a ceiling, he's a guy that you see the relief potential, right? Like you see him being able to be a nasty late inning reliever with, a fastball and that just disgusting slider he has. So I was pretty blown away by seeing his stuff for the first time like that. And then Brandon Sproat follows it up, and he looked amazing as well. Dialed it up to 99. There's a reason the Mets drafted this guy twice. He struck out 2 in a dominant inning. And then even Calvin Ziegler, who's a little bit of a forgotten Mets prospect, he touched 97 and struck out 2. He wasn't quite as dominant as McLean and Sprout, from my vantage point. Like I thought that Ziegler, wasn't quite blowing hitters away the same way those two did. But there was a reason the Mets have been so high on this guy for so long. Injuries have sort of limited him in his career. I don't even remember when he was drafted. I feel like it was like 2019 off the top of my head. Don't quote me on that. I'm not entirely sure I'm right there, but he was a guy they paid over slot and hasn't really had the numbers or really been on the mound enough. But they wanted to put him in this showcase game, and you see why. He has really good stuff. So if you think about, who we saw in this game and the 2 guys that didn't pitch, and Vassell and Scott, that's 8 arms in this system right now that are pretty intriguing. You have Vassell, Scott, and Hamill that all could conceivably factor into a big league rotation by 2025. You have Tidwell and Stewart, who right behind, maybe 2026, could even be promoted mid-season 2025. Those guys are in AA already and have some upside. And then we'll see where Sproat and McLean finish this year. They probably start in St. Lucie, but I don't think they stay there long. There's a lot of arms to like right now in this Mets system. And it's interesting because Andy Green, who's helping, head the player development out for the Mets. He came on the broadcast, and when asked about the system, he talked about the pitchers. Obviously, there's great hitters too, but I think this notion that the Mets have not developed pitching and don't have good arms in their farm system, I think that's going to change soon. I think you're going to start to see, for one, the implementation of the pitching lab and the way these guys were able to get their data in at the end of last season and get an off-season program catered to their needs, like Christian Scott showing up this year with a nasty sweeper. Like all of a sudden, you're going to see these guys adding more pitches to their arsenal and getting some results. I really do believe that this farm system, by the end of this next year coming up, you're going to look at their top 20 prospects, and I wouldn't even be surprised if half of them, if not more, ended up being pitchers. I mean, they're just because guys are just going to pop up too that we don't even know about right now, that might shine in a big way. So I'm very, very excited by what I saw on the mound. In the box, I mean, not to say that I was underwhelmed, but it's just the hitters didn't really jump out to me the way some of the arms did. So, but I guess everyone's throwing the ball well in Port St. Lucie right now, so maybe we can't take too much from that. Still, though, I thought it was a really fun event. I thought SNY did a good job with it, just interviewing the players throughout, getting Andy Green on, getting the manager from Binghamton last year on as well. So just a really cool broadcast to watch. If you can find a rewatch anywhere, definitely try to check that out. Now, I want to go through roster cuts in the next segment. Shintaro Fujinami did not pitch well, so I want to touch on that, where we're at with position battles. So we'll go through all of that stuff in the next segment here. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. And also right now, after you place that $5 bet, you can also look at MLB futures. So if you want to bet on the Mets to win the World Series at plus 5,000, bet on their over-under win total at 81.5 wins. If you think they're going to be a winning team, take that bet and you could win by the end of the year. And remember, again, you place that $5 bet first if you want to bet on the tourney or, an NBA game. And that's $200 that you'll get back in bonus bets if that $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. The Mets made some roster cuts on Friday. Joey Lucchesi was the big headliner. He was optioned to AAA Syracuse. No surprise there. Lucchesi got a little bit of a later start in camp as far as getting ramped up. We only saw him once, didn't have the best outing, so I don't think anyone is shocked that he is not going to be in the starting rotation come opening day. And that now narrows the mix down to 6. You got Jose Quintana, Luis Severino, Sean Manaea, Tyler McGill, Adrian Hauser, and Jose Budo. David Stearns was asked about a 6-man rotation today. It was partially under the context of Kodai Senga, and I will note that Senga is 7 to 10 days behind. David Stearns has just said that this is, trying to be very cautious, make sure that when he gets back, he'll be healthy and ready to go. At the end of this 7 to 10 day waiting period, they'll get some more imaging done. If everything shows to have been healed properly, he'll start a throwing program. I think the earliest we see Kodai Senga at this point is probably mid to late May. More likely, it's possibly June at this point, beginning of June, which if you get him healthy for June, July, August, and September, that's fine. I think the Mets would take that. So it's just making sure that when he comes back, he doesn't have to go on the IL again. And I support that 100%. I think they're doing the right thing, especially when you have 6 viable starters right now, because Jose Budo has thrown the ball really well. 1 earned run in 10 innings pitched. He's actually thrown the ball better than Adrian Hauser, but as Stearns said today as well, they're not going to get too carried away by spring training results. They monitor them, but that's not the only thing they're looking at. They're looking at the work that's done on the backfield, how ready these guys are. There's a lot that goes into it. A lot of data that they have too that we don't. So I don't think that Hauser is going to lose his spot in the rotation to Budo. He doesn't have any options. He's going to be on the MLB roster. Theoretically, I guess they could put Hauser in a long man situation, But even though he didn't pitch the best tonight, he still threw over 60 pitches in 5 innings. So he's stretched out. He's got the experience. The question is just, do they go to a 6-man? And what Stearns mentioned about a 6-man rotation is the Mets believe they have the depth to do that effectively. And at times they do want to make sure their guys are getting rest, but it just depends on the schedule. So I looked into the schedule. I counted out days through the first month of the season, going from the end of March when the season begins all the way through April. Basically, what I learned is that Jose Quintana would get an extra day rest in his first 2 turns through the rotation. Essentially, how it all breaks out. The number 1 starter, which is Quintana, that's been announced, will start on 4 days rest just one time all the way through April. Only once. Numbers 2 through 4 in the rotation, which I imagine Severino would be number 2, would start on 4 days rest twice. The first time being on April 10th, when, again, if it is Severino in the number 2 spot, he would be pitching against the Atlanta Braves in Atlanta. Now, that's 12 games into the year, April 10th. If the Mets wanted to, they could have a bullpen game. They can go to a spot starter for that outing and then assign that pitcher back to AAA and, again, have everybody getting extra rest through the entire month. Otherwise, numbers 2 through 4 will start on 4 days rest twice in April. The number 5 starter would only start on 4 days rest once. And again, Quintana would only have to start on 4 days rest once as well. So because of all of that baked in rest, because the Mets have, I think it's 4 off days in the first 25 games, and because David Stearns talked about optionality as well, that options are important. You want to preserve your depth. I think Budo is just going to get the short end of the stick. But if he goes out and has another great start, the Mets might just decide to stick him in the bullpen, or who knows? Who knows? Maybe they actually do put Hauser in the bullpen, or they might go to the 6-man rotation. So I think that's still a real competition to be decided. Reed Garrett was option, which again factors into what Stearns said about optionality. He had an option. They used it. Now the bullpen mix looks like this. You got Edwin Diaz, Adam Ottavino, Brooks Raley, Jake Diekman, Drew Smith, Jorge Lopez. Those guys are all but locked in stone, assuming health. Phil Bickford, Johan Ramirez, and Sean Reed-Foley are your 3 pitchers with no options, who in some respects, I should say, have a leg up, but we'll see. Michael Tonkin, Shintaro Fujinami are on contracts that are, well, for Tonkin, it's a split contract. For Fujinami, I believe they described it as an MLB deal that has options written into it. Regardless, I believe those 2 guys could be optioned down. And then your non-roster invites that are still in camp, Austin Adams, Yaxel Rios, and Cole Sulser. So you're down to 8 guys competing for 2 spots. That's assuming Budo doesn't make the team. Now, Fujinami did pitch on Friday and looked awful. He hit the leadoff batter. He threw 3 wild pitches. He walked 3. He did not record an out. He all but pitched himself off the roster tonight, in my view. I think he's going to be in Syracuse. They're going to try to work with him, get him to control his stuff. So maybe that's 7 that it narrows it down to. Tonkin, again, makes sense to make the team because he's a long man, 3 1/3 scoreless so far. But Johan Ramirez also pitched 2 innings the other day. He has 6 scoreless, no options. So those are the decisions the Mets will have to make. And then just getting back to Austin Adams, he has shined the most among the non-roster invites. This is the guy that throws pretty much nothing but sliders. In 4 2/3, he has 10 strikeouts, which is by far the most in camp for a reliever. He's got a funky delivery. That slider is nasty. I feel like he's earned a spot in this bullpen, but because he's on a minor league deal, he just might not get one. The other 2 guys that were optioned or reassigned, Austin Allen and Rylan Bannon, both guys on minor league deals. And funny enough, Bannon still got into the game on Friday night and had an RBI double. Going over the names still in camp that might be cut next week. I don't know if next week would be the final roster cuts or if they'll have maybe one more round of cuts and then a final set of cuts after the final game. But you got Tomas Nido and Hayden Sanger as far as the catchers, because Austin Allen was the 5th catcher in camp that just got optioned or assigned. Nido and Sanger, I doubt they make the team, but they're still technically in camp. G-Man Choi, Jose Iglesias, Yolmer Sanchez, and Luke Voigt are in camp among the infielders. Ben Gamble and Trace Thompson among the outfielders. Right now, I would say that the competitions that are left here, it's the bullpen spots that we already mentioned, / Jose Budo being in the mix as well. Then it's DJ Stewart versus G-Man Choi. is what I view for that last bench spot. Although, maybe Zach Short, because he is a guy that's on the 40 with no options. So if the Mets really want to keep him, he could find himself on the team. I don't think Luke Voigt's going to make it. He's 2 for 23 with 10 strikeouts. I know they don't care that much about spring results, but if you're getting blown up every time you're getting in the box, I think they notice that. Trace Thompson has cooled off a bit. Ben Gamble's hitting below the Mendoza line. So I don't know if either of them make the team. Iglesias and Sanchez haven't stood out more than Zach Short has, and Short is already on the roster. So I think the last bench spot, assuming that Narvaez, Tyrone Taylor, and Joey Wendell are the first three, it's between Stewart, Choi, and Short, in my view. And DJ Stewart helped himself out on Friday. I want to talk about that, what happened in the game, and also JD Davis signed elsewhere. So we'll go through all that stuff in the final segment. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs as well as their Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides millions of movies, TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's for opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. And they just recently added their Fire TV channels, which will deliver a consistent supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands that are all for free. And that includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more, and keep you up to date on all the latest in the world of sports. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. To learn more, visit www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. We're going to close the show on JD Davis, but first I want to discuss what happened at Clover Park on Friday night, Mets versus Nationals. Adrian Hauser took the ball. He did not have the best start. The positive side of things, he got to 64 pitches. He threw 5 innings. He struck out 6, did not walk a batter. The downside, he gave up 4 hits, including a 3-run homer to Lane Thomas in that 5th inning, and he gave up 4 runs overall. So not the best start. Hauser has the worst numbers in camp among the starters that are, planning to make this team here, but I don't think that's going to affect his roster spot unless he just gets blown up in his final start. Brooks Raley struck out the side in the 6th inning. Jorge Lopez hit a batter who Francisco Alvarez erased by throwing him out. Alvarez, it seems like he's caught the last, 6 base stealers that have attempted on him. Looks phenomenal behind the dish. So that was awesome to see. Then Lopez got the next 2 guys out to get out of that inning without giving up any runs. Now, I already mentioned Fujinami had a rough night, so we'll not have to get into that anymore. Phil Bickford did pitch a scoreless 9th inning, allowed a hit, but struck out 2. His ERA in camp is still over 10, even with that scoreless inning. I don't know if the Mets value him enough to keep him. Again, no options on Bickford, so they'd have to pass him through waivers if they don't keep him. You never know. Maybe they could pass him through waivers. He gets claimed by somebody else that can work out a deal, or maybe he passes through waivers and he ends up in Syracuse. But I don't believe he's going to make the team at this point. That's just my opinion. On the hitting side, I mentioned DJ Stewart in the last segment. He led off the game with the home run, and he needed it. He's had a rough spring, but with that one home run, all of a sudden, your stats look a lot better. That's just how it works under these small sample sizes. I do think that Stewart probably has better raw power than G-Man Choi. With that said, G-Man Choi has more MLB experience and a better eye at the plate, is the way I would sort of compare those 2 guys. Francisco Lindor went 2 for 3. Brett Beatty went 1 for 3. Mark Vientos, rough night, 0 for 3, 2 strikeouts, grounded into a double play. Francisco Alvarez, 0 for 3, 3 strikeouts. Starling Marte, 1 for 3 with an RBI single. G-Man Choi, 0 for 4 with a strikeout. Harrison Bader, 2 for 3. And my guy, Joey Wendell, got another hit. He went 1 for 3. All right, so now let's go over the JD Davis situation, because I was fascinated by the reaction from Mets fans on JD Davis. There was a lot that were in my camp. Why in the world would the Mets even consider signing this guy? And there was others that were ready to welcome him back with open arms, which is probably the perfect encapsulation of what his tenure with the Mets was like. There was always that group that loved JD Davis and then that other side that hated him, and there probably wasn't much in the middle. Ultimately, he did what I thought he would do. He signed somewhere where he got the chance to play. It's that simple. He lost some money for sure with this whole situation. Remember, he was supposed to make $6.9 million with the Giants. Because they signed Matt Chapman and basically released him here, they were able to only pay him termination pay. I've seen varying. I saw one that said 1.1 million, another one 1.5. Let's just say it's 1.5 million in termination pay. Well, he's signed a $2.5 million deal. So he went from 6.9 million to $4 million guaranteed. That's rough. He does have $1 million in incentives, so that'll get him closer. But I've never lost $1.9 million. That's got to be a tough pill to swallow. And I think the reason why I signed with the Athletics is he wants to get that money back. And I'm sure they gave him the, kind of sign off that he's going to be in the lineup every day. Whether that's at third base, first base, DH, not sure their situation, but I bet you JD Davis is going to get out there and get 600 to 700 plate appearances, depending on where he hits in the lineup. And if he stays healthy, and he'll play 155 plus games. And that's what you should do when you're going to be a free agent the following season. So hopefully for Davis, he can have a good year, get a 2 to 3 year contract next offseason, and forget all about this. But it's been a pretty rough couple weeks here for JD to have to go through all that. I'm just happy he's not on the Mets, though, because it did not make sense to me to sign a marginal upgrade and block out your prospects. I've been on the record that if they were able to get the other JD Martinez, who would be a legitimate cleanup hitter, I'd be all for it because that makes your team a lot better. But to box out Vientos and Beatty with Davis, it just was an ill-fitting group, in my opinion. You could have said, hey, if there's, 1,400 plate appearances to be split between DH and third base, you could have got, two of those guys 500, one of them 400. It could have all worked out. It could have. Or even if you call it 1,300, maybe it's, 450, 450, 400. They all could have gotten time. I understand that. But I wouldn't want JD Davis taking 2 third base starts a week from Brett Beatty and a couple of DH starts from Mark Vientos. If JD Martinez starts all those games, I'm for it. But I'm happy the Mets didn't end up landing him. I imagine they probably put an offer in front of him because they thought, hey, if we get him at whatever it might have been, let's just say they offer him $3 million instead of the 2.5 the Athletics ended up signing him for. For them, it's a small investment to add an MLB veteran who has played in New York before, who definitely on the surface makes their 2024 team better. I just don't think that he made them better enough to warrant that pursuit. So he ends up in Oakland. He gets to play all the time. Good for him. For the Mets at this point, you're looking at a lot of playing time from Mark Vientos and Brett Beatty, which can end up being a good thing or a bad thing this year. But in the long run, learning what you have in those guys is the right decision to make for the 2025, 2026, 2027 Mets. For the 2024 Mets, those could end up being 2 holes in your lineup, but you got to learn. So that's going to be all, though, for today's edition of Locked On Mets. A ton happened on Friday. I had to come on and do a show and ended up doing a full show. I was kind of planning to do a 2-segment show, and a lot went down. So I appreciate all of you who tuned in over this weekend. Hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll be back with another show on Monday. As always, thank you all for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. We're trying to get to 10,000 subs. So I appreciate all of you who subscribe. If you want to follow me on X, you can do so at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or on the Amazon Fire TV channels to check out the first ever 24/7 show covering everything in the world of sports with our local experts from each team and our league-wide experts from each league. You can find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.